So when you start looking at the landscape of cities across the globe and the patterns that you see, there are a number of interesting findings you see. We have already talked about some of the regional differences in the speed at which urbanization shifts from developed economies to Latin America, to some of the large Asian nations, and perhaps a little afterwards in the future to Africa. But there is other patterns as well, and the most important one we have focused on is the shifting weight of the largest cities to the middleweight ones. And the largest cities, which we call megacities, and that are commonly defined as cities with 10 million or more inhabitants, have traditionally been a lot of the focus of our attention to the emerging world. We have heard about the megacities from Shanghai to Sao Paulo to Mexico City to Cairo to Nairobi. In a way, there's a lot of talk about the challenges of rapidly growing megacities. And in fact, many of these cities went through a very rapid process of urbanization and economic transition that didn't allow the cities to keep up with the demands for infrastructure and services. And that means that many of these cities have run into constraints to their growth. They are too, in many cases, congested. The services are insufficient. Pollution is one that's starting to bother people. And for that reason, the growth rate of these cities is starting to slow down. This is something that economists call diseconomies of scale, that hit after you have benefited from a lot of the economies of scale of increasing size of plants and other benefits, and then you start reaching a tipping point when diseconomies of scale start to hit in. And this is in fact what we are seeing. The biggest cities, the megacities, are no longer growing faster than the economy overall. It is the mid-sized cities that are really the engines of growth. Now, they are seeing faster entry of new people, so their populations are growing faster. They are also finding different niches of growing into different directions. You see cities like Cancun, for example, being a real tourist mecca. You see manufacturing centers in Puebla, that is a center in Mexico of automotive industries. And then you have resource-intensive industries. For example, again, picking just examples from Mexico, we can find Villahermosa, for example. So this is just in one country. You see very different patterns of growth in the mid-sized cities. And we can tell similar stories of cities in India, Africa, etc. And it's the diversity and the collective dynamism of these mid-sized cities that are not yet at the top end of their size when they start suffering from diseconomies of scale, but are large enough to get the economies of scale that really allow them to grow as fast as they do. And of course, when you are talking about the large number of mid-sized cities, between 200,000 to 10 million inhabitants in the emerging world, there is almost 2,000 of them. So of course, the experiences are very varied. Not every city is going to be a successful city. There is going to be ones that are going to decline from their past glory. But collectively, in a way, when you look at them across the board, particularly in the emerging world, it is the fact that each city is forced to find their own path forward that makes us relatively optimistic. It is not true that we can guarantee that this growth is going to continue, and there is a number of trends that make it less likely, particularly in certain regions, for the mid-sized cities to bloom. One of them is aging. In Western Europe and Japan, the share of population over 65 is starting to be very high in some cities. So let me take an example. Trieste in Italy, we expect over 30% of the population to be over 65 by 2025. This means that the opportunities of economic activity start to be very different. The challenges for the city are very different. You will no longer be looking to educate young people and build skilled labor forces. You're going to be having a lot more demand for services to elderly. So depending a little bit of where you are, what are the demographic trends that you see, your challenges for your city and opportunities for your city are going to be very different. And there are other factors that influence how likely a city is to grow. One of them is that how close is it, or how well it is linked to the global engines of growth or the emerging market fast-growing cities. If you are far away in a relatively stable environment that is not connected either by by people connections, students coming in and out, or by business connections, being part of a value chain where you produce one part of a product or component that is then used to produce goods that are exported or imported from other parts. If you're not connected in any of those ways to the growth engines, that means that probably your overall growth prospects are lower because you have already benefited from that big swing of urbanization over the course of the history. So in general, while we are optimistic for the prospects of the globe overall in its capacity to sustain growth, we don't expect every city to have the same opportunities, and there is a lot of uncertainty in each of the individual city performances that depend on both the endowments, what they have inherited in terms of their population, their geography, etc., but also in the way how the city itself, its businesses and its people are going to adjust to the environment and take advantage of the opportunities they have or address the challenges they are facing.